Good wishes to all of you. Our pasts 2, Chapter 4, The Mughal Empire. Look at Figure 1, the Red Fort. Ruling as large a territory as the Indian subcontinent with such a diversity of people and cultures was an extremely difficult task for any ruler to accomplish in the Middle Ages. Quite in contrast to their procedures, the Mughals created an empire and accomplished what had hitherto seemed possible for only short period of time. From the latter half of the 16th century, they expanded their kingdom from Agra and Delhi until in the 17th century they controlled nearly all of the subcontinent. They imposed structures of an administration and ideas of governance that outlasted their rule, leaving a political legacy that succeeding rulers of the subcontinent could not ignore. Today, the Prime Minister of India addresses the nation on Independence Day from the ramparts of the Red Fort in Delhi, the residence of the Mughal emperors. Do you think this painting suggests that the Mughals claimed kingship as a bright right? Look at Figure 2, a miniature painting dated 1702 to 1712 of Taimur, his descendants, and the Mughal empires. Taimur is in the center and on his right is his son Miran Shah, the first Mughal emperor Babur's great great grandfather, and then Abu Sid, Babur's grandfather. To the left of the Taimur are Sultan Muhammad Mirza, Babur's great grandfather, and Umar Shaikh, Babur's father. The Mughal emperors Babur, Akbar, and Shah Jahan are the third, fourth, and fifth individuals, and Taimur's right, and on his left in the same order are Humayun, Jahangir, and Aurangzeb. Who were the Mughals? The Mughals were descendants of two great lineages of rulers. From their mother's side, they were descendants of Genghis Khan, died 1227, the Mongol ruler who ruled over part of China and Central Asia. From their father's side, they were the successors of Timur, died 1404, the ruler of Iran, Iraq, and modern day Turkey. However, the Mughals did not like to be called Mughal or Mongol. This was because Genghis Khan's memory was associated with the massacre of innumerable people. It was also linked with the Uzbeks, their Mongol competitors. On the other hand, the Mughals were proud of their Timrid ancestry, not least of all because their grand ancestor has captured Delhi in 1398. Look at Figure 3, Mughal army on campaign. Look at Figure 4. Cannons were an important addition in 16th century warfare. Babur used them effectively in the First Battle of Panipat. Gunpowder technology was brought to India for warfare in the 14th century. Firearms were used for the first time in regions such as Gujarat, Malwa, and Deccan, and was used by Babur in early 16th century. They celebrated their genealogy pictorially, each ruler getting a picture made of Timur and himself. Take a look at Figure 2, which is somewhat like a group photograph. Mughal military campaigns. Babur, the first Mughal emperor, 1526 to 1530, succeeded to the throne of Fergana in 1494 when he was only 12 years old. He was forced to leave his ancestral throne due to the invasion of another Mongol group, the Uzbeks. After years of wandering, he seized Kabul in 1504. In 1526, he defeated the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, at Panipat and captured Delhi and Agra. Table 1 charts some of the major campaigns of the Mughals. Study it carefully and see if you can notice any long term patterns. You will notice, for example, that the Afghans were an immediate threat to Mughal authority. Note the relationship between the Mughals and the Ahoms. See also chapter 7. The 6th see also chapters 8 and 10. And Mewar and Marwar. See also chapter 9. How was Humayun's relationship with Safavid Iran different from Akbar's? Did the annexations of Golconda and Bijapur in Aurangzeb's region and hostilities in the Deccan? Table 1. Mughal Empires. Major campaigns and events. Babur 1526 to 1530. 1526 defeated Ibrahim Lodi and his Afghan supporters at Panipat. 1527 defeated Ranasanga, Rajput rulers and allies at Kanah. 1528 defeated the Rajputs at Chanderi, established control over Agra and Delhi before his death. Humayun 1530 to 1540, 1555 to 1556. Humayun divided his inheritance according to the will of his father. His brothers were each given a province. The ambitions of his brother Mirza Kamran weakened Humayun's cause against Afghan competitors. Sher Khan defeated Humayun at Chausa 1539 and Kannauj 1540, forcing him to flee to Iran. In Iran, Humayun received help from the Safavid Shah. He recaptured Delhi in 1555 but died the next year after an accident in this building. Akbar 1556 to 1605. Akbar was 13 years old when he became emperor. His reign can be divided into three periods. 1556 to 1570. Akbar became independent of the regent Bairam Khan and other members of his domestic staff. Military campaigns were launched against the Sudis and other Afghans, against the neighboring kingdoms of Malwa and Gondwana, and to suppress the revolt of his half brother Mirza Hakim and the Uzbeks. In 1568, the Sisodia, capital of Chittor, was seized, and in 1569, Ratnambore. 1570 to 1585, military campaigns in Gujarat were followed by campaigns in the east in Bihar, Bengal, and Orissa. These campaigns were complicated by the 1579 to 1580 revolt in support of Mirza Hakim. And the third, 1585 to 1605, expansion of Akbar's empire. Campaigns were launched in the northwest. Kandahar was seized from the Safavids. Kashmir was annexed, as also Kabul. After the death of Mirza Hakim, campaigns in the Deccan started in Berar. Khandesh and parts of Ahmednagar were annexed. In the last years of his reign, Akbar was distracted by the rebellion of Prince Salim, the future Emperor Jahangir. Jahangir 1605 to 1627. Military campaigns started by Akbar continued. The Sisodia ruler of Mewar, Amar Singh, accepted Mughal service. Less successfully, campaigns against the Sikhs, the Ahoms, and Ahmednagar followed. Prince Khurram, the future Emperor Shah Jahan, rebelled in the last years of his reign. The effort of Nur Jahan, Jahangir's wife, to marginalize him were unsuccessful. Shah Jahan 1627 to 1658. Mughal campaign continued in the Deccan under Shah Jahan. The Afghan noble Khan Jahan Lodi rebelled and was defeated. Campaigns were launched against Ahmednagar. The Bundels were defeated and Orcha seized in the northwest. The campaign to seize Balkh from the Uzbeks was unsuccessful and Kandahar was lost to the Safavids in 1632. Ahmednagar was finally annexed and the Bijapur forces sued for peace. In 1657 to 1658, there was conflict over succession amongst Shah Jahan's son. Aurangzeb was victorious and his three brothers, including Dara Shikoh, were killed. Shah Jahan was imprisoned for the rest of his life in Agra. Aurangzeb 1658 to 1707. First, in the northeast, the Ahoms were defeated in 1663 but rebelled against in the 1680s. Campaigns in the northwest against the Yusufzai and the Sikhs were temporarily successful. Mughal intervention in the succession and internal politics of the Rathod Rajputs of Marwar led to their rebellion. Campaigns against the Maratha chieftain Shivaji were initially successful, but Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji, who escaped from Agra, declared himself an independent king, and resumed his campaigns against the Mughals. Prince Akbar rebelled against Aurangzeb and received support from the Marathas and the Deccan Sultanate. He finally fled to Safavid Iran. Second, after Akbar's rebellion, Aurangzeb sent armies against the Deccan Sultanates. Bijapur was annexed in 1685 and Golconda in 1687. From 1698, Aurangzeb personally managed campaigns in the Deccan against the Marathas, who started guerrilla warfare. Aurangzeb also had to face the rebellion in North India of the Sikhs, Jats, and Satnamis, in the northeast of the Ahoms, and in the Deccan of the Marathas. His death was followed by a succession conflict amongst his sons. Look at map 1. Military campaigns under Akbar and Aurangzeb. Mughal traditions of successions. Military campaigns under Akbar and Aurangzeb. Okay. Mughal traditions of successions. The Mughals did not believe in the rule of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited his father's estate. Instead, they followed the Mughal and Timrid custom of compulsory inheritance, or a division of the inheritance amongst all the sons. Follow the highlighted passages in Table 1 and note the evidence for rebellions by Mughal princes. Which do you think is a fairer division of inheritance? Primogeniture or compulsory? Compulsory. Mughal marriages with the Rajputs. The mother of Jahangir was a Kachwaha prince, daughter of the Rajput ruler of Amber, modern day Jaipur. The mother of Shah Jahan was a Rathor princess, daughter of the Rajput ruler of Marwar, Jodhpur. Mughal relations with other rulers. Take a look at table 1 once again. You will notice that the Mughal rulers campaigned constantly against a ruler who refused to accept their authority. But as the Mughals became powerful, many other rulers also joined them voluntarily. The Rajputs are a good example of this. Many of them married their daughters into Mughal families and received high positions, but many resisted as well. The Sisodaya Rajputs of Mewar refused to accept Mughal authority for a long time. Once defeated, however, they were honorably treated by the Mughals, given their lands Watan back as assignments. Watan Jagir. The careful balance between defeating but not humiliating their opponents enabled the Mughals to extend their influence over many kings and chieftains. But it was difficult to keep this balance all the time. Look at table 1 again. Note that Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji when he came to accept Mughal authority. What was the consequence of this insult? Mansabdars and Jagirdars. As the empire expanded to encompass different regions, the Mughals recruited diverse bodies of people. From a small nucleus of Turkish nobles, Turanians, They expanded to include Iranians, Indian Muslims, Afghans, Rajputs, Marathas, and other groups. Those who joined Mughal service were enrolled as Mansabdaras. The term Mansabdara refers to an individual who holds a Mansab, meaning a position or rank. It was a grading system used by the Mughals to fix rank, salary, and military responsibilities. Rank and salary were determined by a numerical value called Jat. The higher the Jat, the more prestigious was the noble's position in court and the larger his salary. The Mansabdar's military responsibilities required him to maintain a specified number of savar or cavalrymen. The Mansabdar brought his cavalrymen for review, got them registered, their horses banned, and then received money to pay them as salary. Okay, Jat ranking. Nobles with a Jat of 5000 were ranked higher than those of 1000. In Akbar's region, there were 29 Mansabdars with a rank of 5000 Jat. By Aurangzeb's region, the number of Mansabdars had increased to 79. Would this have meant more expenditure for the state? Mansabdars received their salaries as revenue assignments called jagirs, which were somewhat like iktas. But unlike muktis, most mansabdars did not actually reside in or administer their jagirs. They only had rights to the revenue of their assignments, which was collected for them by their servants, while the mansabdars themselves served in some other part of the country. In Akbar's region, these jagirs were carefully assessed so that they were equal to the salary of the Mansabdar. By Aurangzeb's region, this was no longer the case, and the actual revenue collected was often less than the granted sum. There was also a huge increase in the number of Mansabdars, which meant a long wait before they received a jagir. These and other factors created a shortage in the number of jagirs. As a result, many jagirdars tried to extract as much revenue as possible while they had a jagir. Aurangzeb was unable to control these developments in the last years of his reign, and the peasantry therefore suffered tremendously. Look at figure 5. The Mansabdar on march with his savars. Look at figure 6. Details from a miniature from Shah Jahan's reign depicting corruptions in his father's administration. A corrupt officer receiving a bribe and a tax collector punishing poor peasants. Jabdan Jamindars. The main source of income available to Mughal rulers was the tax on the produce of the peasantry. In most places, peasants paid taxes through the rural elites, that is, the headman or the local chieftain. The Mughals used one term jamindars to describe all intermediaries, whether they were local headmen of villages or powerful chieftains. Akbar's revenue minister Todarmal carried out a careful survey of crop yields, prices, and areas cultivated for a 10-year period. 1570 1580. On the basis of this data, tax was fixed on each crop in cash. Each province was divided into revenue circles which with its own schedule of revenue rates for individual crops. This revenue system was known as Jabt. It was prevalent in those areas where Mughal administrations could survey the land and keep very careful accounts. This was not possible in provinces such as Gujarat and Bengal. Look at figure 7. Akbar receiving the Akbarnama from Abul Fazl. In some areas, the Jamindars exercised a great deal of power. The explanations by Mughal administrators could drive them to rebellion. Sometimes jamindars and peasants of the same caste allied in rebelling against Mughal authority. These peasants' revolts challenged the stability of the Mughal Empire from the end of the 17th century. Akbarnama and Ain-i-Akbari. Akbar ordered one of his close friends and courtiers, Abul Fazl, to write a history of his rise. Abul Fazl wrote a three-volume history of Akbar's rise, titled Akbarnama. The first volume dealt with Akbar's ancestors, and the second volume recorded the events of Akbar's reign. The third volume is the Ain-i-Akbari. It deals with Akbar's administration, household, army, the revenues, and the geography of his empire. It also provides rich details about the traditions and culture of the people living in India. The most interesting aspect about the Ain-i-Akbari is its rich statistical details about things as diverse as crops, yields, prices, wages, and revenues. A closer look at Akbar's policies. The both features of administration were laid down by Akbar and were elaborately discussed by Abul Fazl in his book, the Akbarnama, in particular in its last volume, the Ain-i-Akbari. Abul Fazl explained that the empire was divided into provinces called Subas, governed by a Subadar who carried out both political and military functions. Each province also had a financial officers or divan for the maintenance of peace and order in his province. The Subhardar was supported by other officers such as the military paymasters Bakshi, the minister in charge of religious and charitable patronage, Star, military commanders Fauzdars, and the town police commander Kotwal. Noor Jahan's influence in Jahangir's court. Look figure 8. Noor Jahan's Farman. Mehrunisa married the Emperor Jahangir in 1611 and received the title Noor Jahan. She remained extremely loyal and supportive to the monarch. As a mark of honor, Jahangir struck silver coins bearing his own titles on one side, and on the other the inscription struck in the name of the Queen Begum Noor Jahan. The adjoining document is an order Farman of Noor Jahan. The square seal states command of her most sublime and elevated majesty Noor Jahan Pacha Begum. The round seal states, by the son of Shah Jahangir, she became as brilliant as the moon. May Noor Jahan Pacha be the lady of the age. Dogma. A statement or an interpretation declares as authoritative with the expectation that it would be followed without question. Bigot. An individual who is intolerant of another person's religious beliefs of culture. Akbar's, Akbar's nobles commanded large armies and had access to large amount of revenue. While they were loyal, the empire functioned efficiently, but by the end of the 17th century, many nobles had built independent networks of their own. Their loyalties to the empire were weakened by their own self interest. While Akbar was at Fatehpur Sikri during the 1570s, he started discussion on religion with the ulama, Brahmanas, Jesuit priests who were Roman Catholics and Zoroastrians. These discussions took place in the Ibadat Khan, Ibadat Khana. He was interested in the religion and social customs of different people. Akbar's interaction with people of different faiths made him realize that religious scholars who emphasized ritual and dogma were often bigots. Their teachings created divisions and disharmony amongst his subjects. This eventually led Akbar to the idea of Sulaikul or universal peace. This idea of tolerance did not discriminate between people of different religions in his realm. Instead, it focused on a system of ethics, honesty, justice, peace that was universal applicable. Abul Fazl helped Akbar in forming a version of governance around this idea of Sulaikul. This principle of governance was followed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan as well. Look at figure 9. Akbar holding discussions with learned individuals of different faiths in the Ibadat Khana. Can you identify the Jesuit priests in this picture? Akbar commissioned the translation of many Sanskrit words into Persian. A Maktab Khana or translation bureau was also established at Fatehpur Sikri for this purpose. The Mahabharata, Ramayana, Leelavati and Yoga Vasishtha were some of the notable Sanskrit works that were written up for translation. The Rajmanamha Rajmanamaha Persian translation of the Mahabharata contains lavish illustration of the events of Mahabharata. Shall I kill? Jahangir Akbar's son described the father's policy of Shall I kill in the following words. As in the wide expanse of the divine comparison, there is room for all classes and the followers of all creeds. So, in his imperial dominance, which on all sides were limited only by the sea, there was room for the professors of opposite religions and for beliefs good and bad. And the road to intolerance was closed. Sunnis and Shias met in one mosque, and Christians and Jews on a church to pray. He consistently followed the principle of universal peace. Shulh Aikil. The Mughal Empire in the 17th century and after. The administrative and military efficiency of the Mughal Empire led to great economic and commercial prosperity. International travels described it as the fabled land of wealth. But these same visitors were also appalled at the state of poverty that existed side by side with the greatest opulence. The inequalities were glaring. Documents from the 12th year of Shah Jahan's reign inform us that the highest ranking ranking Mansabdars were only 445 in number out of a total of Mansabdars were total of 8,000. The small number, a meter 5.6% of the total number of Mansabdars received 61.5% of the total estimated revenue of the empire's salaries for themselves and their troopers. The Mughal emperors and their Mansabdars spent a great deal of their income on salaries and goods. This expenditure benefited the artisans and peasantry who supplied them with goods and produce. But the scale of revenue collection left very little for investment in the hands of the primary producers, the peasants, and the artisan. The poorest among them lived from hand to mouth, and they could hardly consider investing in additional resources, tools, and supplies to increase productivity. The, the wealthier peasantry and artisanal groups, the merchants and bankers profited in this economic world. The enormous wealth and resources commanded by the Mughal elite made them an extremely powerful group of people in the last 17th century. As the authority of the Mughal emperor slowly declined, his servants emerged as powerful centers of power in the regions. They constituted new dynasties and held command of provinces like Hyderabad and Awadh. Although they continued to recognize the Mughal Empire in Delhi as their master, By the 18th century, the provinces of the empire had consolidated their independent political identities. We will read more about them in chapter 10. Elsewhere, kings and queens. There were several great monarchs, all near contemporaries in different parts of the world in the 16th century. These included the ruler of Ottoman Turkey, Sultan Sulman 1520 to 1566. During his rule, the Ottoman state expanded into Europe, seizing Hungary and besieging Australia. His armies also sieged Baghdad and Iraq, much of North America, Africa, all the way into Morocco, acknowledged Ottoman authority. Solomon also reconstructed the Ottoman navy. Its domination over the eastern Mediterranean brought the navy into competition with Spain. In the Arabian Sea, it challenged the Portuguese. The monarch which was given the title of Alcuin, the lawgiver, because of the large number of regulations Conan passed during his regime. These were able to standardize administrative procedures throughout the expanding domains of the empire and specifically to protect the peasantry from forced labor and extraordinary taxes. Later in the 17th century, when public order declined in the Ottoman domains, the reign of Suleiman Quanchi was remembered as a period of ideal governance. Find out more about Akbar's other contemporaries, the ruler of England, Queen Elizabeth, 1558 to 1603. The Safavid ruler of Iran, Shah Abbas, 1588 to 1629, and the more controversial Russian ruler, Caesar Ivan IV Vasilevich, also called Ivan the Terrible, 1532 to 1584. Imagine you have inherited a kingdom. Remember, Babur and Akbar were about your age when they become rulers. How would you make your kingdom stable and prosperous? Let's recall. Match the following: Mansab Mongol, Sisodiya Rajput, Rathor Rajput, Nurjahan, Subadar, Marwar Governor Uzbek, Mewar rank Jahangir. Keywords: Mughal, Mansab, Jagir, Jat, Savar, Shulaikul, Primogeniture, Corporate Jab the Jamindar. Question number 2. Fill in the blanks. The capital of Mirza Hakim, Akbar's half brother, was Dash. The 5 Deccan sultanates were Berat, Khandesh, Ahmadnagar, Dash and Dash. If Jat determined a Mansabdar's rank and salary, Savar indicated his dash. D. Abul Fazl, Akbar's friend and counselor, helped him frame the idea of dash so that he could govern a society composed of many religions, cultures, and castes. Question number 3. What were the central provinces under the control of the Mughals? Question number 4. What was the relationship between the Mansabdar and the Jagir? Let's understand. Question number 5. What was the role of the Zamindar in Mughal administration? Question number 6. How were the debates with religious scholars important in the information of Akbar's ideas on governance? Why did the Mughals emphasize their Timurid and not their Mongol descent? Let's discuss. Question number 8. How important was the income from land revenue to the stability of the Mughal Empire? Why was it important for the Mughals to recruit Mansabdars from diverse backgrounds and not just Turanians and Iranians? Question number 10. Like the Mughal Empire, India today is also made up of many social and cultural units. Does this pose a challenge to national integration. Question number 11. Peasants were vital for the economy of the Mughal Empire. Do you think that they are as important today? Has the gap in the income between the rich and the poor in India changed a great deal from the period of the Mughals? Let's do question number 12. The Mughal Empire left its impact on the different regions of the subcontinent in a variety of ways. Find out if it had any impact in the city, village, or region in which you live. Thank you.